Okay, so resume the recording. Okay, fantastic. Okay, everybody, good morning. We are beginning chapter 5 today, which is a pretty interesting chapter. Well, as all chapters go, right? Every chapter has its own uniqueness and specialty, but this is actually a very interesting parak because it's going to give us an added dimension and appreciation for the study of Torah. And this is actually what we're all busy doing over here. We're all studying Torah, and the Alter Rebbe is going to actually explain what happens when somebody not only studies Torah, but actually understands, obviously each person on their level, but what happens actually when a person understands the Torah that they are actually studying, that they are learning. So the last chapter, chapter 4, when we spoke about the expressions of the soul, right? The way the soul expresses itself in thought, speech, and action. We spoke about how the will of Hashem actually comes down into this world through Torah and mitzvahs. And we did mention, the Alter Rebbe mentions briefly in chapter 4, how interesting it is that Torah, being the will of Hashem, comes down in an undiluted form, as opposed to mitzvahs, actually. Because mitzvahs are also the will of Hashem, pure will of Hashem. But somehow you have to use a physical object. It's distilled in the will of Hashem is distilled into physical, mundane objects. And by doing the mitzvah, we are united with God thereby. So there's a huge advantage in doing the mitzvahs. And also we have to remember that the whole objective of Tanya, all 53 chapters of Tanya, are to explain to us the beauty of the action. In other words, the reason why we should be doing mitzvahs, right? But now we are going to examine the study of Torah as being the will of Hashem that does not change. And the example that the Alter Rebbe gave in last chapter was that Torah is like water, right? And we know that Torah is sometimes called Mayim Chayim, living waters, right? So water, when we pour water from above to below, it doesn't go through a change. It just descends. The nature of water actually is that it goes down, which is why the miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea was a very big miracle, because Hashem made that the water should stand up instead of its nature flowing downwards. But the water that flows downwards into our world, meaning that Torah which flows downwards to us, does not undergo a change. It's the same will of God from a very, very, very high place into this lower place, and which is the world. And the Alter Rebbe in the last chapter ended off comparing it to the embrace of a king, which it doesn't matter if the king's embrace, if you embrace a king with one layer of clothing or 5 layers of clothing, if the king is wearing a cloak or many garments, or the king is wearing simply just one garment. So the Alter Rebbe actually joined together Torah and mitzvahs in the last chapter, that it's like embracing the king when we do mitzvahs. But in this chapter, we will particularly concentrate on the understanding of Torah, not only the studying of Torah, because sometimes we can say words of Torah using our faculty of speech, right, in the thought, speech, and action category, but not really understand it. And here the Alter Rebbe will explain to us why it's important to understand. And if you think about it, the whole concept of the Tanya and the whole concept of Chabad philosophy is using our intellect to understand Torah. That's why Chabad is called Chabad. Chachma, Bina, Das. It's an acronym for our intellect, that we use our intellect, and obviously we know we can do plenty of things with our intellect. We can produce emotions and etc. But here in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe will speak about the importance of understanding the Torah. So when you understand concepts, right? Let's think about any concept, right? You're learning some form of knowledge. When you understand that concept, it is considered to be that your intellect grasps the subject. Now, we even use that colloquially. We even use that as an expression, like, did you grasp? Did you have a grasp on it, right? But the word grasp actually means to hold, right? So when we study and understand Torah, any subject, actually, we'll get to Torah in a minute, but any concept, when we understand it finally, it is as if our intellect is grasping the subject and surrounding it. So let's say this hand is the concept or subject, and this hand is the intellect. Your intellect grasps the subject and surrounds it. And therefore, the subject is enclosed within the intellect. So here we have an example already of understanding how it works with the Torah. So let's say you learn something in Torah. That means that your intellect understands the Torah and grasps, embraces the Torah, but it also means that the Torah is within you. In other words, you surround the Torah. Okay, and I'm going to break this down slowly because it might be a little complicated. This is what happens when we understand a concept or a subject. The mind surrounds the subject. But how about during the process of understanding? You haven't yet understood. You're in the process of understanding. You're examining the subject from all angles. You are concentrating. You are reflecting. Have we ever heard of the expression when a person becomes lost in thought? Right? When a person becomes lost in thought, this is the point where you are not grasping the subject, but you are in the subject. So here's your intellect, and here's the subject matter. You have now gone in an opposite direction, which actually happens before you reach a final understanding. So again, let's repeat that so that everybody understands. During the process of understanding, right, the subject embraces you because you are in the subject. If you are inside something, that concept surrounds you. But once you've understood, you then surround and grasp the subject. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes? Okay, because it's important for us to continue. Now, in order to grasp an object, right, the object has to fit into your hand. In other words, if we want to fit something to another recipient, another keli, another vessel, the bigger the vessel has to be bigger. The something, the concept, or whatever it is that we're putting into the vessel has to fit. It has to be smaller, right? Now, from all different sides. The same. Now, in Torah, here's something very interesting. We can understand that while we are learning something, the Torah, right, is surrounding us because we are immersed in the Torah. We are inside the Torah. So we could understand that the Torah surrounds us, right? Much like the other expressions of the soul, thought, speech, and action, when we express our soul, when you wear clothing, that's why they're called garments, a garment surrounds you. The garment is not in you. Garment surrounds you. So at this point, okay, we're studying, we're trying to understand. We can understand how the Torah is a garment for us. We are enclosed in the Torah. The Torah surrounds us. But then what happens once we've understood the Torah? We've now said that once you've understood a concept, you then surround the Torah. How can that be when Torah is not smaller than us? Torah is much, much larger than us, much greater than us, infinite, Hashem's infinite wisdom. So that's why the Alter Rebbe actually comes along in this parak and says, when we learn Torah, there is nothing similar in the physical world that we can actually compare it to. Because in the physical world, when you want two things to become one, you have to put one into another, and the one has to be bigger and the other has to be smaller, and then it fits, right? You cannot have a situation of both surrounding each other and being surrounded by each other at the same time. except for Torah. Both of these things happen at the same time, and it's not even for us to understand because it's beyond our understanding. So at the same time as we are immersed in the Torah and the Torah surrounds us, at the same time we surround the Torah and the Torah is within us. God's wisdom is within us. Because when a Jew studies Torah, he surrounds godliness while being surrounded by godliness at the same time, which is not according to the nature of this world. Now, to explain even further, you could think that it applies to any kinds of intelligence. For example, take a concept in mathematics, right? Or architecture. It's different because when you are studying a Mishnah or a Gemara or Tanya or Chumash or whatever it is that you're studying, it's not that you are grasping the subject matter. It's not that you're grasping the subject and being immersed by the subject at the same time, but the Torah, the Mishnah, the Tanya, the Chumash, whatever it is Hashem himself. So you're not grasping the concept, you're grasping Hashem, which is not true of any other subject in this world. So for example, let's take this example even further. Let's say you're an architect, you're studying architecture. When you are thinking about a building and how to build it, you are not actually grasping the actual building, right? So let's say you've understood the concept, you've got it, so we say that your mind now grasps the concept. You're not grasping the actual building, you are grasping the idea of a building, the concept, the design of the building. But when a person studies a building, he's grasping the image of a building, but not the building itself, which is not the case by Torah. Because by Torah, yes, while we are in the midst of trying to understand it, the Torah surrounds us. God's wisdom and Hashem surrounds us. But once we've understood something, each person according to their level, you are grasping not the concept, you are grasping Hashem himself. A kind of oneness that can only occur with Torah and with holiness. So for example, in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe brings an example. He brings an example many, many times in Gemara. We don't usually study Gemara, women, because, we have other things to do, let's say. But in Gemara, we will find many times that there's an argument between Ruvain and Shimon. And Ruvain wants this and Shimon wants that. And the Gemara comes to some sort of conclusion. And it kind of does not seem very relevant to our lives or to our practical day-to-day existence, right? But the Alter Rebbe does not bring like the concepts of Shabbos or kashrus or, keeping kosher or anything else, but he brings this example specifically to emphasize that all of Torah is divine. Not even when we are discussing two people arguing over a physical object, as opposed to the other mitzvahs which seem spiritual in nature, right? In other words, there doesn't seem to be a point in this discussion of Ruvain and Shimon arguing over a physical object. However, the Alter Rebbe Dafka specifically brings this subject because to show us that everything in Torah is equal and everything in Torah is divine. And even if it doesn't make sense to you, right? Even if it doesn't make sense to you, it is nonetheless Hashem's knowledge, which you are surrounding and are being surrounded by at the same time, which according to nature doesn't really work and only works with the Torah and the divine knowledge of Hashem. Therefore, what's interesting is that there is even a superiority of understanding the Torah above the action mitzvahs. Now, before we say, oh, okay, so we don't have to do the mitzvahs, we'll just study Torah all day long, the Alter Rebbe will explain why actually we do have to do the mitzvahs. But the comprehending of Torah is superior in a certain way, to all the mitzvahs, and even the mitzvah of studying Torah In other words, speaking the words of Torah is considered a mitzvah even without understanding, but understanding the Torah is superior because in a mitzvah, Hashem surrounds the neshama, right? So the neshama is enclosed in godliness. It expresses itself through godliness. The neshama is, in other words, wearing godliness through its three garments of thought, speech, and action. But with Torah and understanding Torah, besides for the fact that your intellect is being surrounded by godliness, you also surround the godliness. In other words, godliness is within you. Godliness actually enters in you. So with mitzvahs, godliness is you are being surrounded by Hashem surrounds the neshama. But with Torah, not only does Hashem surround the neshama, but actually enters the neshama, and you surround Hashem. So that's why we say that Hashem is in you. So when a person does a mitzvah, it's a one-dimensional connection with Hashem, that the person is enveloped in godliness, right? The person is inside godliness, but Torah is considered a different level. Torah, the Alter Rebbe, is actually considered to be food for the soul. Now, why all of a sudden are we saying that the Torah is now food for the soul? Because what is the difference between food that we eat and a garment that we wear? Remember that the mitzvahs are garments. They are expressions. We wear them. We are in the mitzvahs. But food is something that we ingest internally, as opposed to garments, something that we wear externally. So Torah is like food, like bread, because Torah gives you inner life, right? From the source of life himself, which is life, which is Hashem himself, right? The mitzvahs surround a person from the outside. They may protect you. This gives you a godly protection because they are surrounding you from the outside. But the Torah nourishes from the inside. So just to recap a little bit before everyone gets, completely confused over here, right? The difference between doing mitzvahs and learning Torah is that when you do a mitzvah, you are enclosed in Hashem's will. Hashem's will encompasses you, surrounds you. It is expressed through speech and action, and even saying words of Torah. But when you learn Torah, you're actually using a garment which is very close to you, which is the garment of thought, and then you understand it, so you use your intellect. You can encompass Hashem's will at the same time by understanding, which is not according to nature. It only happens with Hashem's will and godliness, etc. When you understand the concept, it's as if your mind surrounds the concept, right? As if you're holding it. During the process of understanding, you are being held by the concept. Torah learning, you are both grasping and being grasped by the Torah. And there's nothing similar in the physical world. So that is also why we say that there is a superiority in learning Torah. In fact, Chazal tell us that Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The study of Torah is equal to doing all the mitzvahs. Now, here's the thing. Tanya is all about action and about doing mitzvahs and the importance of doing mitzvahs, and hamaisa hu ha'ikar, like the main thing is to do a mitzvah. And the whole point of Tanya was that Moshe Rabbeinu, explaining the pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu told the nation of Israel that ki karev elecha hadavar ma'od, it's very close to you, be able to beficha in your mouth and in your heart and understanding, etc. But the main thing is la asoisoi, to do. So why all of a sudden does the Alter Rebbe go into understanding Torah? Like, why is it so important, right? Obviously, if a person is not on the level yet of understanding Torah, he or she has to perform mitzvahs. That is extremely important because that connects a person directly with Hashem. But your soul needs nourishment, like food. Like when a person's hungry, They can't really think clearly. They like get a little hangry, as we say. They're not really functioning as the best version of themselves, right? The same thing goes for your soul, because your soul, your neshama, your godly soul especially, comes from Hashem. But firstly, undergoes the process of tzimtzum, which will be explained much later on in Tanya. It undergoes a concealment from Hashem in order to reach this world and enter to the body. So it needs extra nourishment to keep the connection alive. And not only did it undergo tzimtzum, it also lives together with the animal soul. So it has to be nourished, because if it's not nourished, it takes away nourishment. It takes like the same kind of nourishment as the animal soul. And like when we sin, for example, we take our energy from klipa and not from holiness. So that is why this is the whole point of this chapter. That is why it is so important to realize the benefits of studying Torah, and not only studying Torah, but understanding Torah that we study, in order to grasp Hashem, meaning Hashem is within us, and to be grasped by Hashem at the same time. This is in order to nourish our souls. And when we nourish our souls, that brings us to the next step of being able to do the mitzvahs, because when we do the mitzvahs, our actions are in alignment with our values, which is Hashem and the will of Hashem. When we don't nourish our souls, our actions become kind of animalistic and are more in alignment with our animal soul than with our godly soul. And that's what brings us to this disconnect between Hashem and ourselves. Okay, let me just see what you wrote, Sina, in a second in the chat. Hashem is within us. By studying Torah, we're getting the food that our soul needs. Exactly. Do we get nourishment for our soul? Yeah, in any other ways? Oh, yes, lots of ways. We have to. Oops, what did I just do? 1 second. Yes, we do get nourishment from our soul, for our soul, by doing the mitzvahs also. But Torah is a more internal kind of nourishment. We, at the very end of this part of Tanya in chapter 53, so we have some time to get there, but it's actually being discussed lately in Tanya actually of the day. But we say we have to do the mitzvahs in order to keep the flame of the Shekhinah above our souls. Like gourmet, yeah. It's through doing the mitzvahs we keep the flame of Hashem alive around us. So it's not that the mitzvahs don't have a benefit. Of course they do. They surround us, they protect us, Hashem is with us. But this chapter is speaking about the advantage of actually studying and comprehending, using our intellect to comprehend the Torah. Because that way the Torah comes within us, we grasp the Torah, and it's like taking spiritual nourishment. And actually, what's interesting on a practical level, lots of people, for example, lots of women who come to this class or listen to the recording, tell me, and come to my classes in Brazil also, they tell me, oh, that's my nourishment for sometimes the week, or sometimes they say it lasts a few days and then they need to learn something else, right? We can see it on a practical level, how studying Torah nourishes us, keeps us in alignment with our values, with the will of Hashem. Okay, hi, Sarah, you had a question? Go ahead.
I'm not quite sure how to pose this question. Sometimes, for me at least, when I am learning Torah and trying to grasp it, and I can't grasp it, like there's like this sort of like a veil that doesn't allow me to. So that's part of it. And then the other part is that even when you do understand it, it doesn't stay with you. And then you go on and do whatever, folly or whatever. So how is it that if it's part of you, that it's not staying with you?
Okay, so it's a very good question you asked. Very, very good question. So first of all, you asked two different questions, I think. One question is, what happens when we just don't grasp the Torah that we're learning? Like we're not understanding it. So with that, maybe somebody else will have something else to say, but I feel that every part of Torah, it's not I feel, it's not a made up thing, it exists, right? Every part of Torah has different levels of understanding, right? So we know, for example, that There is the famous acronym called PARDES, which is Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, which is the simplest explanation, then goes deeper and deeper. So first of all, there are different layers of understanding. Sometimes when we learn by ourselves, a person, yes, doesn't understand and therefore needs help to understand it. And that's okay. Which is why traditionally in Judaism, there's the concept of chavuta. You learn with somebody else, right? Because learning with somebody else always enables you to understand better. And if not with a chavruta, then with a teacher, like coming to a Tanya class like this, right? You obviously understand it better. So there's always ways to understand. What happens is that the Yetzer Hara comes in and says, "Oh, you don't understand this, so don't continue." But sometimes understanding of Torah comes through effort, and that effort is part of the process. That effort is part of the process to understanding. So that's the first part of your answer, right? I hope that helps. If it doesn't, let me know. The second part of the answer is that, okay, so we study Torah, we grasp a concept, and then we go ahead and we sin, or we do some stupid things, or we act in complete disconnect with what our values are. So yes, obviously it's a process, right? The Alter Rebbe is telling us that at the time that you're learning Torah and you're understanding it, the Torah is in you and you are grasping. That does not mean to say that when you finish learning the Torah, you have now become a tzaddik, because it takes a lot of inner work to make that Torah a part of you. Even our intellect, for example, is comprised of three parts: Chachma, Bina, and Das. So Bina is the understanding part. Das is the part that we've got to work hard on making it a part of us. And in the times of the Gemara, people would review their learning 100 times. And later on in Tanya, we will see how that wasn't even considered serving Hashem, because that was the norm. Only when a person reviewed it 101 times, then that's considered growth. That's considered going out of your comfort zone and making it a part of you. So to answer your question, no, it's not easy. It's not an easy process. We have to learn it over and over again, which is why it's so nice that we're like repeating all these concepts now in Tanya to make it more a part of us. But that's why traditionally, and again, women were different, but traditionally men would study Hasidus, and still do in yeshivas, before davening, because it's like air, the air you breathe. You don't just breathe air for one day and say, "Good, I'm filled up with air and I'm done." You know, it's like you have to keep learning. You have to keep breathing. You have to keep it's something constant. It's a constant avodah. Does that answer your questions? Okay. Anyone else?
Hannah?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm trying to get over the fact that I'm going to feel not so intelligent when I ask this question. So I'm getting over it. When you say, I know that men in Chabad, I know Chabad men, they study Hasidus before they start to daven. What are they studying? What are they studying? What?
Different things.
What?
All different discourses, different Tanya. Some people study. Mainly
Okay.
they concentrate on I think probably discourses and in
So
Maimorim of
Slichot
Hasidus
and
of all the different rebbes.
and they
Not
just choose, it's
not
random,
yeah.
like
So if they're in yeshiva, usually the group studies the
right.
same
But
subject. So
you have a
that's
guy
chosen.
going to shul and he's just going to shul and he's going to
Yeah,
study.
he can choose whatever inspires him. He can also discuss it with somebody and get suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
Can I suggest something? Because this just happened for me. My son, chapter 41 is famous for saying before
Yeah.
you start davening. So my son put it on a piece of paper for me, like, and I'm going to share it with you. It's beautiful. He put it on, like, my daughter-in-law actually did it, and you just read it before you daven, and it sort of talks about love and fear and puts you into the zone.
So happy I said that, Chayas.
Yeah, so am I.
Thank you.
Yeah. It also starts off with the fact that Hashem is watching over you, so it gives you right.
That connection.
Also, chapter 41 is a segula, by the way, for not becoming angry during the day.
Ah,
Oh, wow.
perfect. We all
Yeah.
need that sometimes.
When people actually wrote to the Rebbe that about anger, like that they were struggling with anger, the Rebbe suggested that they would actually learn chapter 41 off by heart to be able to access that chapter whenever they felt a feeling of anger and to overcome it. It's a very, very powerful chapter indeed. You can learn whatever you want, but that is a good chapter to have.
Thank you. Thanks.
Some people learn like the Tanya of the day before they start davening, also just to put them in the right frame of mind. But when I say learn Chassidus before davening in yeshivas, for example, they literally spend an hour doing that. They're not just doing it for 5 minutes. Obviously, when people get married and they need a parnasa and they don't have that time, so some people do that on Shabbos, for example, or once a week. There's never an all or nothing situation, right? In the Yetzer Hara loves to tell us that it has to be all or nothing. But even if you could learn something once a week, it just develops your fear and love of Hashem, as Chaisar said, this chapter discusses. And you start davening with a whole different approach. It's like taking a spiritual medicine because we ingest it. That's the thing.
Hi, Sarah. I'd love to. Are you going to share that with everyone? That chapter 41.
Yeah, all my daughter-in-law did was pull out the Tanya and like the explanation of like this sort of all fit on one sheet because to open up the Tanya and start reading it was too much for me. I'll post it on. I don't think I can get a PDF of it, but I can take a shot of the actual piece of paper and you can print that off.
It'd be great. Be great. It sounds like it's probably a good idea to study I have like a scheduled time to study every day, and then maybe have like little snacks during the day, little pieces of tidbits.
I like that. Snacks. Okay. Yeah. For sure. No, I like that because it's like, it's like sometimes, you study and you're like, okay, I'm done with the studying for today and the rest of the day. Yeah, I like that.
I do that a lot of times. Like I'll study in the morning, then I go to work. It's just like I forget what I even studied in the morning because I'm focused on something else. So it'd be nice to have like little tidbits during the day that like refresh me, keep me going. And before I go to bed. Just it doesn't have to be so much, I guess, just a little bit.
Right. Fantastic. So I will see you all next week.
Thank you, Han.